What if I told you that one of the least played Final Fantasy games on the original PlayStation might actually be the best one? Yeah, not 7 or 8, I'm talking about Final Fantasy IX. The game that came out too late, looked too different, and almost got buried by the hype of the PS2, but somehow, it turned out to be a masterpiece. In this video, we're diving deep into the forgotten gem of the series, from its overlooked launch to its timeless art, emotional story, and maybe the most heartbreaking character in all of JRPG history. This is why Final Fantasy IX deserves way more love than it got. Back in 1998, while everyone at Square was still knee-deep finishing Final Fantasy VIII, a small team had already started laying the groundwork for something completely different. They weren't in Tokyo this time, they were in Hawaii. And the decision to start development in Hawaii wasn't just a logistical move. It was part of Square's broader goal to become a more global company. By setting up shop in a more relaxed and culturally diverse environment, they hoped to shake up their creative process and attract talent from outside Japan. This new setup gave the team a bit more breathing room to experiment, and it's no coincidence that Final Fantasy IX ended up feeling so different from its predecessors. Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the series, took on the role of executive producer. And for him, this wasn't just another entry, it was personal. He'd later describe Final Fantasy IX as the closest the series had ever come to realizing his original vision, one rooted in high fantasy, with heartfelt storytelling and character-driven moments. And with Sakaguchi already thinking about stepping away from the franchise, this game became a kind of farewell statement, a spiritual homecoming. Final Fantasy IX was designed to be a throwback, not to the gritty sci-fi vibes of VII or the emotional drama of VIII, but to the roots of the series, the classic fantasy. Castles, mages, swords, airships, all of it wrapped in a colorful medieval setting. It was the last mainline Final Fantasy on the original PlayStation. The devs pushed for something more character-driven this time, like Sakaguchi wanted, and that's how the active time events were born. Those little side scenes that show what's going on with characters even when they're off-screen. It was all about making the world feel alive, like everyone had their own path, not just the main hero. The setting was a total shift. Instead of futuristic cities or realistic tech, they went with a world just starting to tinker with steam and magic-infused engines. People relied on wind and water for energy, and while the story still touched on dark themes, the game's tone was way lighter and more whimsical than the last two entries. Thing is, not everyone was ready for that shift. When Final Fantasy IX was announced in January 2000 during the Square Millennium event, it wasn't alone. Square dropped the reveal for Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XI at the exact same time. Final Fantasy IX was meant to close out the PlayStation 1 era with a nostalgic, fantasy-driven throwback. Final Fantasy X would push the series forward on the PlayStation 2 with full 3D visuals and voice acting, and Final Fantasy XI aimed to break new ground as the first MMO in the series. But despite the excitement, IX's sudden shift in style caught people off guard. With Yoshitaka Amano back on the art and a more whimsical tone, it looked more like Chrono Cross than the gritty realism fans had gotten used to with Final Fantasy VII and VIII. By the time Final Fantasy IX actually launched later that year, the PlayStation 2 had already hit the shelves, and all eyes were on Final Fantasy X. So here comes this colorful game with castles, knights, and talking rats. Some fans didn't even realize it was a mainline title at first. And to make things worse, Dragon Quest VII launched around the same time in Japan, completely dominating the RPG market there. Critically, Final Fantasy IX was praised right out of the gate. Famitsu gave it a 38 out of 40. IGN called it a stunning swan song for the PlayStation 1. And GamePro highlighted its gorgeous visuals and beautifully composed soundtrack as standout elements. Reviewers consistently pointed out how the game balanced old-school charm with refined mechanics, and many even claimed it was the most polished of the PS1 trilogy. But despite the strong reception, the game didn't move numbers like its predecessors. It ended up selling around 5.5 million copies, significantly less than Final Fantasy VII and VIII, both of which broke the 8 million mark. Maybe it was the timing, maybe it was the drastic shift in tone. Whatever the reason, it just didn't make the same cultural splash as 7 or 8 at the time. But behind the scenes, Square actually considered giving Final Fantasy IX a second chance. There were early plans to remake the game for the PlayStation 2 as early as 2001, and it wasn't just wishful thinking. The general belief inside the company was that launching 9 right as the PS2 era began had hurt its visibility and sales, especially sandwiched between two heavy hitters like Final Fantasy VIII and X. A PS2 remake could have delivered the same heartfelt story and world, but with updated visuals and mechanics that matched the new generation. Unfortunately, the idea never made it past the discussion phase, and for a long time, 9 simply faded into the background. Final Fantasy IX returned in 2010 via digital re-releases, then got an HD remaster in 2016 with visual upgrades and quality-of-life features. It later hit all major platforms, keeping the game alive while fans still wait for a full remake. The moment you press start, Final Fantasy IX hits different. No cinematic explosions or over-the-top intros, just Zidane, cracking jokes with his crew in a dark room, and then, bam, a monster kicks the door open. No music, no warning, and it makes the first battle theme hit even harder. When that classic Final Fantasy-style track kicks in, it's like a wave of nostalgia straight from the Super Nintendo era. But here's the thing. This game doesn't just lean on old memories. It builds a bridge between generations. It may have dropped the realism of Final Fantasy VIII, but what you get in return is something magical. The CG cutscenes still hold up, the environments are full of charm, and visually, it might just be the best-looking game on the original PlayStation. Then you get to the city of Alexandria, and man, it's alive. There's a whole carnival happening. Stalls, minigames, parades. The place is packed with NPCs from all kinds of fantasy species. Hippos walking around like humans, rat-like merchants, and even cats with hats. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but that's what makes it work. And instead of brooding protagonists or edgy teenagers, you've got a crew that actually feels fun to hang out with. These aren't your typical save-the-world heroes. They're just a bunch of weirdos thrown together by fate. At first, Final Fantasy IX looks like it's just checking all the JRPG boxes. A ragtag crew, a big bad threatening the world, and a journey that slowly pulls everything together. But then, somewhere along the way, it flips the script. It starts asking questions that most games at the time didn't even dare to explore. Questions about identity, mortality, purpose. And suddenly, this lighthearted fantasy adventure turns into something way deeper. At the center of it all are 3 characters, Zidane, Vivi, and Kuja. And yeah, Zidane may be the main protagonist, but this story isn't just about him. It's about what it means to exist when you don't know where you came from or why you're here. Zidane's this cheerful, cocky thief who's always looking out for others, doesn't remember his childhood, and for most of the game, that's just background noise. But when the truth hits, it hits hard. His entire identity gets turned upside down. And the way he handles it, it says a lot about who he really is. Then there's Kuja, the villain, and the drama king in silver armor with a god complex. On the surface, he's everything Zidane isn't. Vain, cruel, and obsessed with power. But when you dig deeper, they're actually connected in ways neither of them expected. Both are part of something much bigger, something engineered. But where Zidane was raised with kindness, Kuja was left alone, fed only the idea that he was meant to destroy. That contrast between nurture and nature becomes the emotional core of the story. And right in the middle of all this is Vivi. This tiny black mage with glowing yellow eyes who just wants to understand who he is, where he came from. Vivi's journey alone is enough to put Final Fantasy IX in the top tier of JRPG storytelling. It's rare to see a character so small leave such a massive emotional impact. His arc is quiet, heartbreaking, and full of moments that hit way harder than you'd expect from a game that looks like a colorful fairy tale on the surface. Hey, quick breather. If you've made it this far, you might as well hit that like button. Seriously, it takes less than half a second and your thumb won't even break a sweat. Also, tell me in the comments, what was the one FF9 moment that made you stop and think, wow, this game is something else? Or just type "Vivi deserved better" in all caps if this game wrecked you emotionally. Comments like yours help the algorithm show this video to more people who still need to rediscover this classic. And that's how you help the channel keep dropping fresh content every single day. Plus, I read and replied to every single one of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? A Moogle invitation? Smash that sub button and join the crew. Beyond the story, the game just feels good to play. The battle system might not reinvent the wheel, but it's tight, responsive, and keeps you thinking. The summons in Final Fantasy IX aren't just flashy attacks, they're deeply woven into the heart of the story. For characters like Garnet and Eiko, these summons represent a connection to their lost heritage and a power that's as much a burden as it is a blessing. And visually, they're some of the most jaw-dropping moments on the PlayStation 1. Ark's summon animation alone feels like it's melting the console, while Bahamut and Alexander clash in one of the most iconic cutscenes in the game. Unlike other entries that leaned into materia systems or skill trees, Final Fantasy IX brought back the idea of learning abilities directly from your gear. Each weapon, armor piece, or accessory came with a set of skills attached, and the more you fought with that item equipped, the closer you got to permanently unlocking its abilities. It encouraged experimenting with different loadouts and made finding new equipment feel way more rewarding than just chasing stat boosts. And then there's the trance system, which acted like the game's version of limit breaks. Instead of activating manually, trance would trigger automatically when a character took enough damage, transforming them mid-battle into a stronger version of themselves with access to unique moves. It could turn the tide of a fight, but since you couldn't control when it triggered, it added a layer of tension. Sometimes it would activate in a random encounter instead of the boss fight you were saving it for. The mechanics are simple to pick up, but there's enough depth to let you customize your team and get creative with how you approach fights. Plus, the animations are slick, especially for a PlayStation 1 title. And the monster designs are top-notch. Every enemy, boss, and creature you run into looks like it walked out of a fantasy art book. The world is packed with personality, from the towns to the dungeons, and it all holds up incredibly well thanks to the game's stylized art direction. While some PS1 games went for realism and aged like milk, Final Fantasy IX leaned into fantasy, and because of that, it still looks great today. Final Fantasy IX is packed with hidden gems that reward players who dig a little deeper. One of the most infamous is the Excalibur II, a powerful sword you can only get if you reach the final dungeon in under 12 hours, something nearly impossible without skipping cutscenes and knowing the game inside out. The attention to detail goes even further. Vivi's outfit is a direct nod to the classic black mage design from the early games, while Dagger's alternate look clearly echoes the traditional white mage robes. And the Easter eggs don't stop there. Early in the game, when you meet the Tantalus Band, they're actually playing Rufus's Welcome Ceremony, a track lifted straight from Final Fantasy VII. Later in the story, during another stage scene, there's a line that says, "No Cloud, no Squall shall hinder us," which is a cheeky reference to Cloud and Squall from previous Final Fantasies. And here's something even longtime players might have missed. Final Fantasy IX has a hidden two-player mode during battles. By digging into the settings, you can assign control of different characters to a second controller, turning the turn-based system into a low-key co-op experience. What's wild is that Square never really advertised this. It's not in the manual, it's not in the official strategy guide, and it's barely mentioned anywhere. But the funniest secret in Final Fantasy IX involves the Moogle Flute, a simple item that lets you call in a Moogle on the world map, so you can save your game or use a tent to rest up. But here's the thing. If you keep summoning the Moogle and immediately dismissing him without actually saving or resting, he starts to get a little annoyed. At first, he'll just scold you with a bit of sass, telling you not to bother him unless you actually need something. But if you keep doing it over and over, his frustration builds until he's visibly furious. Back on the original PlayStation 1 version, this was just a fun Easter egg. But in the later ports and remasters, Square turned it into an actual achievement. Repeating the prank now unlocks a trophy called One Nag Too Many, making it one of the rare times in gaming where trolling an NPC is not only encouraged, it's rewarded. Then there's the music, and this isn't just peak Nobuo Uematsu, It was the last game in the franchise to feature a soundtrack composed entirely by him, and you can feel the passion in every note. Inspired heavily by medieval music, the score brings the world to life with harps, flutes, and orchestral melodies that shift seamlessly between whimsy and heartbreak. The original release packed in 110 tracks, with an additional 42 released late in Final Fantasy IX Original Soundtrack Plus. In interviews, Uematsu has called this game his personal favorite without hesitation, and it shows. Tracks like You're Not Alone have become iconic, not just for their melodies, but for how perfectly they amplify the game's emotional highs. Final Fantasy IX hasn't just lived on through ports and remasters. It's been trying to step into a whole new chapter, though not without a few bumps along the way. Back in 2021, Square Enix announced an animated adaptation in partnership with the French studio Cyber Group Studios. The project, called Final Fantasy IX: The Black Mage's Legacy, was set to follow Vivi's 6 children on a brand new adventure across Gaia. It was clearly aimed at a younger audience, but still promised to stay true to the heart of the original. The announcement got fans buzzing again, especially when the now-famous NVIDIA GeForce Now database leaked that same year, listing Final Fantasy IX Remake, alongside other unannounced titles which have since been confirmed or launched. But in late 2024, the future of the animated series took a hit when Cyber Group Studios entered judicial recovery due to financial troubles. Despite that, Newen Studios and a few others have shown serious intent to acquire the rights and continue development, keeping hope alive that the series might still happen. But beyond official projects, the fan community has been keeping Final Fantasy IX more alive than ever. On PC, modders have pushed the remaster way past its original limitations with HD texture packs, AI-enhanced backgrounds, and even fully revoiced dialogue using voice synthesis, bringing characters like Zidane and Vivi to life in ways we never got back in 2000. Some fans have gone even further, recreating iconic scenes in Unreal Engine, imagining what a full remake might look like with modern lighting, physics, and cinematic presentation. And it's not just nostalgia talking. Over the past few years, Final Fantasy IX has been climbing steadily in fan rankings, often topping lists as the best or most underrated entry in the entire series. What was once seen as a quirky sidestep is now considered a timeless classic, and that growing love from the community might just be the loudest call for a remake yet. And with Square Enix fully embracing remakes and reboots of its legacy titles, it's starting to feel like we're getting closer than ever to seeing Final Fantasy IX truly return to the spotlight. So now I'm curious, what's your most unforgettable FF9 memory? Drop it in the comments. I'd seriously love to read and reply to it. And hey, if you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. There's way more where this came from.